"You'll never touch my money again, Marcus. Not a cent." Those were the last words Sarah Cole hissed across the courtroom table before flashing that smug influencer smile, the kind that had fooled millions online, and signing the divorce papers like she was closing a brand deal. She had no idea that the man sitting opposite her had already placed a letter in the judge's hands. A single page that would turn her own words into the punchline of the century. What happened when that letter was read out loud made the entire courtroom erupt in laughter, and made Sarah realize she had just outsmarted herself. Viewers, have you ever watched someone's arrogance collapse in real time? Tell me, what would you have done if your ex tried to strip you of everything you built? Subscribe, like, comment and watch till the ending to share this interesting story to family and friends. My name is Ethan Cole, and I used to believe that love and loyalty were enough to keep a marriage alive. I thought hard work could buy respect, that dreams were worth chasing even when the person beside you stopped believing in them. I was wrong. What happened in that courtroom changed everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and revenge. She told him he'd never touch her money again. "That's what my wife Sarah said," her voice dripping with arrogance, every word sharp enough to draw blood. I didn't even lift my head when she said it. I just sat there, quiet, letting her pride echo through the courtroom. I could hear the whispers, the soft murmur of strangers who already decided who the villain was. To them, I looked like a man who had lost everything. To Sarah, I was nothing more than a broken dreamer who'd finally been crushed under the weight of his own ambition. She stood in front of the judge, flawless as ever, silk dress hugging her figure, diamond bracelet catching every light in the room. Even in divorce court, she looked like she was posing for a magazine cover. When she smiled, it wasn't kindness. It was victory. "You'll never touch my money again, Ethan," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her lawyer chuckled beside her, the same man who used to shake my hand at our dinner table, the one who called me brother. I looked at the judge, calm. I'd spent months preparing for this moment. Every sleepless night, every quiet humiliation, every cruel smirk from Sarah, it had all led here. Without a word, I reached into my briefcase and slid a sealed envelope across the polished wooden table. The judge frowned, took it, and began to read. Seconds passed. Then his expression changed. His lips twitched. His shoulders shook. And then, to everyone's shock, he laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full, uncontrollable laugh that echoed through the silent courtroom. The bailiff shifted awkwardly. Sarah blinked in disbelief. Her lawyer stammered, "Your Honor?" The judge wiped tears from his eyes and said between breaths, "Mrs. Cole, you might want to sit down before I read this aloud." Sarah froze. I sat still, hands folded, heart steady. In that instant, every insult, every sneer, every time she told me I was worthless, it all began to crumble. She didn't know what was in that letter. But I did. And I knew that once those words left the judge's lips, Sarah's empire, the one she built on pride and deceit, would start to collapse. People always think revenge is loud, shouting, breaking, destroying. But real revenge is quiet. It smiles. It waits. That day I just smiled. Because this wasn't just a courtroom. It was the stage I'd been building for months. And she was about to realize she'd never known who she was married to. The moment the judge began reading, Sarah's confidence cracked like thin glass. According to the financial disclosures submitted by Mr. Cole, the judge began, his voice echoing, the company in question, SE Innovations, was founded solely under his name 2 years before your marriage. Sarah's face drained of color. Her lawyer leaned forward, flipping through documents, panic rising. I didn't move. I had rehearsed that reaction, calm, unshaken, almost bored. Inside, my chest was burning with quiet satisfaction. You see, Sarah always believed she was smarter. She thought because she handled the public relations she could twist the narrative, make herself the brains of the operation. I let her believe that. I even encouraged it. Because people like Sarah never see beyond their own reflection. The judge continued. Furthermore, the intellectual property, patents, and trademarks, all belong solely to Mr. Cole. Meaning, Mrs. Cole, that your claim to 50% ownership is legally unfounded. The room went silent. Sarah turned to me then, for the first time that day, her perfect lips parting, eyes wide with disbelief. "Ethan, what is this?" I met her gaze, calm as a lake before a storm. "The truth," I said. It felt poetic, watching her world unravel in the same courtroom where she planned to destroy mine. But this wasn't about money, not really. It was about everything she'd taken from me before the lawyers got involved. Because before this courtroom battle there had been love, or what I thought was love. I still remember the first time I saw her. 5 years ago, a charity gala downtown. She was standing under a chandelier, laughing like the world existed just to entertain her. Everyone's eyes were on her, but somehow she looked at me. She said she admired men with vision. Back then I thought she meant it. We built everything together, at least that's what I believed. Long nights, shared dreams, building a company from scratch. But the higher we climbed, the less she wanted to share the view. When investors began noticing me, she started introducing herself as the real mind behind SE. When success came, she rewrote the story, placing herself at the center and pushing me to the edges. Then came the affair. I found out on a Tuesday, a random afternoon when she forgot to log out of her email. Her business partner had sent her something personal, something no business email should contain. I didn't confront her that day. I just read and reread until the ache turned into clarity. I realized then, Sarah wasn't my partner. She was my opponent. And that's when I started planning. I began shifting everything, the company shares, the patents, the accounts. Quietly. Legally. Every detail designed to look ordinary until the day she tried to take it all. That day came sooner than I expected. And now, in this courtroom, my plan was unfolding perfectly. As the judge set the papers down, Sarah's voice cracked. "You can't do this, Ethan. I made you." I looked at her, finally letting the smallest smile curve my lips. "No, Sarah," I said softly. "You just showed me what I was capable of." Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't hear. Her mind was already collapsing inward, a slow implosion of pride. And for the first time I felt free. The laughter started with one man in the back, a short, nervous burst that slipped out before he could stop it. Then another joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the entire courtroom was echoing with disbelief and amusement. Even the stenographer bit her lip to keep from smiling. Sarah turned crimson, her head snapping from side to side, as if trying to locate the source of humiliation and silence it by sheer will. "Order." Judge Harris banged his gavel twice, but even he couldn't hide the smirk tugging at his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a court of law, not a comedy show." The laughter died down, but the tension in the air only thickened. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just kept my gaze fixed on Sarah, the same way she had stared at me months ago when she said, "You'll never touch my money again." That moment replayed in my head, crisp and cruel like a shard of glass. It was the night she moved out. She stood in the doorway of our penthouse, her suitcase open, the city lights painting her face in gold and shadow. "You think you can survive without me?" she'd said. "You'll never touch my money again, Ethan. Never." She slammed the door before I could respond, but I didn't need to. My silence that night wasn't defeat, it was strategy. Because what she didn't know was that she'd already handed me the weapon that would ruin her. See, a year before that fight she made a mistake, a small one but fatal. She'd convinced me to let her handle the company's tax filings, to save us time. It sounded harmless. I trusted her. But she overplayed her hand, transferring company funds to her private account under the guise of business reinvestment. What she didn't know. I had quietly added my attorney, Paul Mercer, to receive copies of every corporate statement for compliance. So when she funneled the money out, Mercer documented everything. Wire by wire. And when the time came, I gave that entire folder to Judge Harris, sealed with one note. "My wife said I'd never touch her money again. Please read this aloud in court." That was the letter he was reading now. Every sentence of it was a legal confession, notarized by her own digital signature. The judge's tone was dry, but the irony dripped from every word. "Mrs. Cole," he said, looking up from the paper, "it appears that these transactions constitute misappropriation of funds from a jointly held business. Would you like to explain why your signature authorizes a transfer of $640,000 into a personal offshore account labeled Private Wellness Fund?" The audience murmured. Cameras flashed. I could almost hear Sarah's pulse thundering from across the room. Her lawyer tried to interject, but she pushed him aside, eyes blazing. "That money was mine. I worked for it." The judge arched an eyebrow. "Then why was it listed as corporate R&D expense on the ledger?" Silence. Sarah looked at me, not with anger now but panic. Real choking panic. The kind that only comes when you realize the person you underestimated outsmarted you completely. I leaned slightly forward, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Remember what you said that night, Sarah? About me never touching your money again?" I let the pause linger, then added, "Seems I didn't have to. You handed it to me yourself." She froze. The courtroom erupted in whispers again, sharp, electric murmurs that made her shrink in her seat. And just like that, I saw it, the first flicker of defeat in her eyes. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because there was still one truth Sarah didn't know. One secret I hadn't revealed, the one that would make her understand why I'd really written that letter. And when she found out, she wouldn't just lose her money. She'd lose her legacy. The courtroom fell into an uneasy hush. You could feel the electricity hanging in the air, like a storm waiting for thunder. Sarah sat frozen, her manicured nails gripping the table so hard that the polish began to chip. Judge Harris cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Mrs. Cole, these transactions suggest a deliberate attempt to conceal corporate earnings. Do you understand the gravity of that? Sarah's lawyer leaned toward her, whispering fast, his expression desperate. She ignored him. She was staring at me again as though searching for a trace of mercy. But there was none left to give. That's when I saw it, the tiny tremor in her hand. Sarah Cole, the woman who once stood in front of shareholders like a queen addressing her kingdom, was shaking. And in that moment I remembered why I once loved her. Because before the ambition, before the deceit, before the game turned cruel, there had been fire in her eyes that wasn't greed. Was hope. Back when we were broke, we used to sit on the floor of our one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by empty coffee cups and late-night ideas. I'd be sketching designs for our tech prototype on napkins while she researched marketing trends on a second-hand laptop. We didn't have money, but we had momentum and laughter. God, she used to laugh. She used to look at me like I was her whole world. But success changes people in slow, invisible ways. The first sign was subtle. She began referring to the company as hers during meetings. Then she started dressing differently, speaking differently, moving as if she was above the life we'd built. By the time investors came knocking, she wasn't the same woman I'd built a dream with, she was a brand. And brands don't bleed. Still I stayed. I told myself love could outlast ego. I was wrong. The judge's voice yanked me back to the present. Mr. Cole, your letter also mentions a secondary document you'd like the court to review? I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Paul Mercer, my attorney, stood and handed the clerk a thick envelope. This contains the original patent filings for SCE's core technology, dated March 14, 2017, 2 years prior to the Coles' marriage. The judge skimmed the pages, his brows lifting. Filed under your sole name? Yes, Your Honor, I replied. And notarized by my mentor, Professor Lang, before Sarah and I ever met. A low gasp rippled through the courtroom. Sarah looked as if she'd been struck. That's impossible. We created the prototype together. I tilted my head slightly. Did we? Or did I show you my work the night after our first date, the one you said was just a hobby? You laughed when I told you it could change the future of small business logistics. Her face paled. She remembered. That was the night she'd said, "You're cute when you dream big." I remembered every word. The judge leaned back in his chair, closing the file. It appears, Mrs. Cole, that the foundation of your claim, joint creation, does not hold. Mr. Cole's filings predate your marriage by over 2 years. Sarah's lawyer buried his face in his hands. The press at the back of the courtroom began to whisper feverishly. And Sarah? She just stared at the table, hollow-eyed, the shimmer of defiance draining from her. I should have felt triumphant. I should have enjoyed watching her empire crumble. But instead, a strange ache started rising in my chest. Because for all her cruelty, I couldn't forget that once she believed in me before the world did. Once she was the reason I didn't give up. But she had crossed a line you can't uncross, when she chose betrayal over partnership. And now she'd learned the price. The judge called for a short recess, and the tension in the room finally broke. People exhaled, whispered, shuffled. Cameras clicked as reporters rushed to the hallway, eager to upload headlines. CO outsmarts wife in court. Sarah Cole's empire collapses. I could already imagine the headlines rolling across social media. Sarah stayed seated. Her lawyer stepped aside to take a phone call, leaving her alone at the table. For the first time in years she looked small, not weak but human. I walked past her as I left the bench. She didn't look up until I stopped beside her. Don't, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't humiliate me any more than you already have. I studied her. You humiliated yourself, Sarah. You just thought the world would always be too polite to tell you. Her lip quivered, but she said nothing. As I stepped into the corridor, memories came rushing back like echoes bouncing off the marble. The gala where we met. The first investor pitch where we stood side by side, hands trembling as we presented our dream. The first $1 million contract that made her cry in the elevator, whispering, "We did it, Ethan. We actually did it." For a moment I wanted to go back, before the lies, before the arrogance, before the affair. But the past was a place that no longer existed. Paul Mercer joined me near the hallway window. "She's finished," he said quietly. "The misappropriation charge alone could ruin her credibility. You could press for criminal charges, you know." I turned to him slowly. "No. I'm not here to destroy her. I just want my name back." He frowned. "You're sure? Because the public sympathy's on your side now. If you press forward, she loses everything." "I've already lost everything that mattered," I said. He nodded and left me to my thoughts. Through the tall courtroom window, I could see the city skyline stretching endlessly, the same skyline Sarah and I used to dream of conquering together. Every skyscraper reminded me of a promise we broke. But that wasn't the only ghost in this story. There was one more secret no one in that room knew, not even Sarah. 6 months before the divorce, I had discovered something else while tracing her offshore accounts. The transfers she made weren't just for her personal luxury. Some of that money was funding another startup, one under her lover's name. A company that, in design and structure, looked suspiciously like a clone of mine. She wasn't just stealing money. She was building my replacement. That realization broke something inside me that I never managed to repair. But it also sharpened me. Made me colder. More deliberate. So I did what she never expected. I funded her lover's company myself. Quietly. Through a shell investment group. Watched him grow, watched him take her money and her trust, until he finally sold his stake and vanished. When she found out he was gone, and took half her stolen funds with him, she came to me that night, mascara streaking down her cheeks, whispering, "He betrayed me." I remember pouring her a drink, handing it to her without a word. I didn't comfort her. Didn't gloat either. I just said one thing: "Welcome to my world." And tonight, as I stood in that courtroom corridor, I realized that was the night I stopped loving her. The gavel called us back in. The break was over. I took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. Because after this there would be no going back. When I returned to my seat, Sarah's eyes were red. She didn't look at me, but I could tell, she knew the tide had turned. The woman who once believed she could never lose was sitting in the ruins of her own making. And I hadn't even revealed the final part of my plan yet. When the recess ended, the room buzzed with a new kind of tension. Not the fiery chaos from before, but a cold, suffocating curiosity. Everyone could sense something was coming. Even the judge looked expectant, as if the story hadn't yet delivered its final blow. Sarah was back at her seat, her posture perfect but her eyes distant, glassy. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically, but she didn't seem to hear him. She was somewhere else, trapped in the realization that the empire she'd built on pride and deceit was crumbling inch by inch. Judge Harris cleared his throat. "We'll proceed with closing statements shortly. However, Mr. Cole, you mentioned a final piece of evidence in your letter. Would you like to submit it now?" Paul gave me a small nod. This was the moment we'd been building toward. "Yes, Your Honor," I said quietly. "But before I do, I'd like to say something on record." Sarah's head snapped up. The courtroom fell silent. I stood slowly buttoning my suit jacket, a deliberate act not of arrogance but of control. "When Sarah and I built SE Innovations, we built it on trust," I began, my voice steady but low. "We were young, hungry, determined to change the world. But somewhere along the line we forgot why we started. Success turned into ownership. Partnership turned into competition. And love," I paused, meeting her eyes, "turned into leverage." The judge listened quietly. Even Sarah didn't interrupt. "I'm not here to ruin her," I continued. "Because the truth is, she's already punished herself more than I ever could. Every dollar she hid, every lie she told, every name she dropped to climb higher, it cost her something that can't be rebuilt." A hush swept through the room. "But," I said, pulling a sealed envelope from my folder, "I owe the truth to more than just this court. I owe it to the people who believed in me. So yes, there's one more thing." Paul handed the envelope to the clerk. It contained the document that had haunted me for months. One that not even Sarah knew existed. Judge Harris unfolded it, scanning the lines carefully. Then his brows shot up. "Mr. Cole, is this accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor." He looked at Sarah. "Mrs. Cole, this document states that your husband has signed over full ownership of all his company shares, transferring them into a charitable foundation under your maiden name. Is that correct, Mr. Cole?" A ripple of confusion spread through the courtroom. Sarah's jaw dropped. "What? That's not possible." "It's real," I said, cutting her off. "Every patent, every asset, every dividend. It's all in your name now. Legally untouchable. You wanted control, Sarah. Now you have it, but not in the way you imagined." She blinked rapidly, her voice trembling. Why would you? Why would you do that? I stepped closer, the courtroom fading around us. Because that foundation is locked. Every cent is dedicated to the causes we once said we'd fight for: small business grants, community education, startup mentorships. You get to be the face of it, but you can't spend $1 on yourself. It's a legacy, Sarah, just not the one you planned. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The audience murmured again, half in shock, half in awe. Even the judge looked stunned. So to clarify, he said, you've surrendered your assets voluntarily for a non-reversible trust? Yes, I said. Because sometimes the only way to win is to let go. Sarah's hand went to her chest, her breath shaking. You mean, I can't use any of it? I shook my head. Not for yourself. But you'll see your name on every plaque, every scholarship, every award. The world will remember you as generous, kind, visionary, everything you pretended to be. Only this time it'll be true. Tears welled in her eyes. Real ones. Maybe the first real thing between us in years. And for the first time I didn't feel anger. Just release. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge didn't speak for a long moment. Then, softly, he said, I think that's all the court needs to hear today. As the gavel struck, I finally exhaled. It was over. Or so I thought. Because just as I turned to leave, Sarah whispered something that made my blood run cold. You think you've ended this, Ethan, she said softly. But you've only just started something you can't control. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment I just stood there, watching her, trying to read if it was desperation or a threat. The look in her eyes wasn't rage anymore. It was something colder, sharper, almost like she'd found a reason to fight again. I should have walked away. I wanted to walk away. But something about that tone, that unnerving calm, made my instincts flare. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was chaos. Reporters swarmed like hornets, microphones flashing, cameras clicking. Mr. Cole, was this all revenge? One shouted. Do you regret giving up your company? Another asked. I ignored them, pushing through the crowd until I reached the quiet of the parking garage. My thoughts were spinning. Sarah's last words kept replaying in my head. Something you can't control. What did she mean by that? Paul caught up with me a few minutes later, clutching a coffee cup and looking drained. You handled that like a saint, he said. I've seen men in your position burn their exes to the ground. You just walked out looking like a hero. Maybe, I said quietly. But something doesn't feel finished. He frowned. You mean her threat? I nodded. He sighed. Let her talk. She's humiliated. She'll lash out, but she's got no cards left. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew Sarah better than anyone. She didn't bluff, not when she sounded like that. When Sarah Cole said something softly, it meant she'd already moved the next piece on the board. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on my balcony overlooking the city, the same skyline we used to toast to back when we were dreamers. The air was thick with distant sirens and neon light, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about all the years we spent chasing power. About how easily ambition can turn into poison. And about how I tried to cleanse myself of it, by giving everything away. But peace didn't come. Just before midnight my phone buzzed. A private number. I hesitated, then answered. A voice I didn't recognize said, Mr. Cole? You might want to see this. An email arrived seconds later. A news article scheduled for early release. Headline, Ethan Cole's Charitable Trust under federal investigation. My stomach dropped. The article claimed that the foundation, the very one I'd created to preserve Sarah's legacy, was being flagged for financial misconduct. The source? An anonymous whistleblower claiming I had laundered company funds under the guise of philanthropy. I opened the attached document. Screenshots, altered transfers, fabricated statements. All designed to make it look like I had stolen from my own company before the divorce. My blood ran cold. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. Sarah had struck back. I called Paul immediately. She's trying to turn the tables, I said, pacing my living room. He skimmed the email and cursed under his breath. This is serious, Ethan. If that story goes live, it'll look like you created the charity to cover embezzlement. You could lose your reputation, everything you just regained. She's good, I murmured. I gave her the face of an angel, and she's using it to bury me. Paul sighed. We can get ahead of this. But we'll need proof, something she can't fake. I leaned against the wall, staring out the window. The city lights blurred through the glass, shimmering like ghosts. Then I'll find it, I said. Because if she wants a war, I'll end it. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the glass, tired, angry but alive. And for the first time since the trial began, I realized, maybe Sarah wasn't the only one who couldn't let go. I stared at the email until the words blurred. Someone had gone to work overnight, sewing a web of lies meant to make me look like the thief. It was the perfect move. Anonymous whistleblower, doctored screenshots, a reputable site ready to publish. The kind of thing that eats reputations alive while leaving the instigator clean. I didn't sleep. I called Marcus first, not Paul. Marcus had been with me since the napkin sketches. He'd left a corporate law firm to help friends launch businesses. He answered on the second ring, voice low. "Show me everything," he said. We met at a diner 2 blocks from my apartment, because nothing calms a frantic mind like stale coffee and fluorescent lights. Marcus spread the screenshots across the table like evidence in a crime show. They faked transaction timestamps, doctored the memo fields, and rewrote a payroll CSV, he said, tapping each with his fingernail. But there's a pattern: sloppy copy-paste in one field, same font used in all the PDFs. Whoever made this was rushed or overconfident. That sounds like Sarah, I said before I could stop myself. The word tasted dangerous in my mouth. Marcus didn't look surprised. That's the obvious suspect. But we need proof. We need origin logs, server IPs, the works. Get me the hosting provider for that news site and your email thread. I'll subpoena. Quietly, I left the diner with a list and a new kind of urgency. I went home and pulled up everything Paul had collected. My bank statements, the notarized foundation paperwork, the transfer authorizations, Professor Lang's original signed patent filings, all the things that had been ironed into the case. I realized how careful I had been. My life had been an archive because my uncle had taught me to document everything. If anything ever goes sideways, he told me once, paper trails are more loyal than people. I kept every receipt, every signature, every email. Marcus worked fast. By the next morning he'd issued legal requests, and in less than 48 hours, we had server logs from the news site and 3 email headers that traced back to a private mail server rented 2 months ago under a shell company name, Meridian PR. Meridian PR, of course, was the agency Sarah used to polish her image. The IP addresses bounced through a chain of VPNs, but one of the exit nodes was misconfigured and left a trail, a traceable bounce, back to a small office building on the east side where Alan Pierce maintained a workspace. The same Alan Pierce who had dinner dates with Sarah and whispered bold promises about taking half of my future. I felt anger rise hot and fast, but I didn't let it burn me. Marcus told me not to go public yet. He wanted a clean subpoena. He wanted forced disclosure that would show the connection without leaving room for an oops, our bad retraction. He said, once we have the logs with origin timestamps and the hosting provider's affidavit, you can go to the site with a claim. They'll have to pull it and then we pounce. While Marcus handled legal angles, Paul dug into the financial side and found something else, a breadcrumb Sarah had left by mistake. In one of the doctored PDFs, a hidden metadata tag referenced a local file path. C:\Alan\documents\drafts\press release _v2.docs. It was clumsy, basic, but it was enough. That path was not a thing journalists would fabricate. It was created by a user on a Windows machine. The Alan folder name matched Alan Pierce. Sloppy arrogance. Armed with that metadata and the hosting logs, we built a case that would make the anonymous whistleblower look like an open-end shut lie. I felt the adrenaline of a man piecing himself back together, stitch by stitch. But part of me worried too. Sarah had warned me, you've only just started something you can't control. Maybe she had reasons to say that beyond spite. Maybe this fight would bring things I wasn't ready for into the light. Marcus called me late that evening with the final piece. We can force Alan to hand over server access, he said. We can show provenance. But there's one more step. You need to be the one who files the complaint. The public will listen to you more than to us. I sat on the edge of my bed and felt the weight of that decision. If I filed, I'd pull the war into daylight. If I waited, the story might publish and wash over everything I'd rebuilt. Either way, something irrevocable would happen. I thought of my uncle's voice again, steady and patient. Document. Endure. Be precise. The truth was a slow machine. Lies were fast and bright but burned out quicker. I typed a draft complaint, left it open, and then stared at the city skyline through my window. Below, lights twinkled like 1,000 small accusations. I clicked send. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A voice, muffled, said only, "Be careful. You don't know what she'll do when you dig." Then the line went dead. My hands trembled. I had the logs, the metadata, the provenance. I had proof Alan had orchestrated the whisper campaign. But the caller's warning was real, and Sarah's last words echoed again in my head. What couldn't be controlled? What had I unearthed that would not only topple her, but change things I hadn't imagined? The court ordered the site to take the story down within hours. The retraction came with an awkward apology buried on the homepage, the kind of apology that feels like a bandage stretched over a still bleeding wound. But the damage had already been stopped, and for once the machine of law and truth moved faster than the machine of rumor. Alan Pierce folded when the subpoena hit. He sat across from Marcus in a small conference room with his hands trembling like a man on a ledge. At first he lied, the practiced kind of denials built for press conferences. He said he'd been hired to consult. He muttered about a rogue intern. But evidence is patient and merciless. Marcus laid out the server logs, the hosting affidavits, the metadata path with Alan burned into it. The room cooled as each lie found its counterweight. "You dragged me into this," Alan blurted, then swallowed. "She told me she deserved it. She said she'd lost everything, she wanted me to make it look like you were the villain. I just helped. I thought she'd pay me. I didn't expect." His voice broke. Then, with the look of a man admitting the worst of himself, he began to talk. Texts, meetings, promises of shared profit, how Meridian PR had rented that private server specifically to seed the story. He even admitted to forging a couple of the screenshots himself, the ones with the altered timestamps. Sloppy work, he said, because he was rushing to meet a deadline Sarah set. Marcus recorded everything. He took a sworn statement in front of a notary, then handed the files to Paul, who moved like a man with a mission. Cease and desist orders, emergency subpoenas, criminal referrals. Within 48 hours the publishing site had removed the article, issued a public notice, and the FBI, yes, the FBI, had asked Alan a few polite questions that quickly became less polite. The press cycle turned on a dime. Headlines that had been ready to crucify me were replaced with exposés about the smear campaign. Sponsors fled Sarah's accounts like cattle from thunder. Her brand partners issued statements. Distancing language, carefully neutral phrasing, the quiet corporate equivalent of turning a back. Overnight, deals evaporated. Her fanbase splintered. People who once praised her authenticity now scrolled through screenshots, replaying weeks of behavior in a new, accusing light. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, watching it unfold, I felt like a man watching the ocean reclaim a sandcastle piece by piece. Necessary but still a sort of loss. Sarah's fall wasn't satisfying so much as it was final, and final things have an echo that lingers. She did one thing I hadn't expected. She fought in the only way she still could. When sponsors abandoned her, she streamed a live apology, sincere on the surface, but beneath it something else flickered. A calculated attempt to control the narrative, to reframe herself as the wounded entrepreneur who'd been the victim of a hostile takeover by a jealous husband. It was transparent and people saw through it. Still, seeing her there, mascara streaked, voice steady, I felt pity. For a flash, I remembered the woman who had cried in the elevator when we closed that first big deal. That memory collided with the woman who'd tried to steal from the company we built together and who'd then launched a smear campaign when cornered. And then, late one night as the dust settled and the city around me settled into the worn hum of neon, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The message was simple, a photograph of Sarah, not glamorous, not staged. She was in a service station parking lot, wrapped in a second-hand coat, looking smaller than she'd ever looked in public. On the image someone had typed in block letters, "You think it's over." No signature. No explanation. It was the kind of message designed to hitch the heart up into the throat. A reminder that people who feel trapped sometimes become unpredictable. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, feeling the old guilt and the new fear twist together. We had won a legal battle, yes. We had cleared my name at least for now. But someone had sent a pointed reminder that ruin is rarely neat. It's messy. It spreads. It hangs in the air like smoke. I didn't sleep that night. I thought about the words Sarah had mouthed in court and in the hallway. You don't know what she'll do. Something you can't control. I'd chased the facts, signed affidavits, secured server logs. I'd made the truth move faster than the rumor. But truth doesn't always stop what people decide to do next. As the dawn blurred into the city, I realized that the next move might be hers, or it might be mine. Either way, it would not be small. I didn't see Sarah again until the final court hearing, the one that would decide the asset division and close the case for good. It had been 6 months since her live apology, since the viral backlash, and 2 since she'd gone completely silent. The tabloids called it the vanishing of Sarah Cole, though in truth she'd only withdrawn from her digital world, which for someone who lived online, was almost the same thing as vanishing. When she walked into that courtroom, even the judge seemed startled. She wasn't the woman who once dazzled rooms. She was thin, pale, her posture stiff but still proud. No diamonds, no designer dress, just a plain gray suit that seemed borrowed. The whispers rippled instantly, cameras from local outlets, a few bloggers lingering near the back. Everyone wanted to see what the fallen influencer would do when the man she tried to destroy stood across from her again. I remember adjusting my tie and realizing that, for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired, like a soldier who's seen the end of the war and no longer wants to swing his sword. Sarah avoided my eyes until the judge called our names. The same judge who'd presided since the beginning, a man who had long since lost patience for our theatrics. "Let's conclude this," he said, tapping his pen. "Mr. Cole, your counsel has submitted a statement for the record. Would you like to address it personally?" Paul looked at me and nodded. "We planned this." I stood, straightened the paper, and spoke the line I'd rehearsed 100 times but still trembled to say. "Yes, Your Honor." "It's not a statement, it's a letter." The judge arched a brow. "Proceed." I unfolded it slowly, the paper creasing in my shaking hands. I took a breath. "Your Honor, before any judgment is passed, I want to read a letter I wrote, to my wife." The room went still. Sarah's lips parted slightly, confusion flickering behind her eyes. I began. "Sarah, when we started this, we were broke but happy. We built something beautiful, and then we let ambition twist it. You wanted to win so badly you forgot what it meant to build. I wasn't innocent either. I let pride become armor. But no matter how far we fell, I never wanted revenge. I only wanted the truth." I paused, meeting her eyes for the first time in months. "You once said I'd never touch your money again. The truth is, I don't want your money. I want peace. So today I'm giving up my claim to any share of your personal accounts, endorsements, or brand royalties. What's left of them is yours. I only ask for my company back, the one I built before you came. Let's end this where we should have, with honesty." There was a ripple through the room, murmurs, a few gasps. Even the judge leaned back, expression softening with reluctant admiration. And then, laughter. Actual laughter from the audience gallery, sharp and surprised, like they couldn't believe what they'd just heard. It started with one of the journalists, then spread, not mockery but disbelief. The irony was too perfect. The woman who said I'd never touch her money again now faced a man who didn't even want it. The judge banged his gavel, half smiling. "Order. I suppose poetic justice has its place." Sarah's face flushed, not with anger but with something closer to shame. Her lips trembled and for a second I thought she'd lash out. Instead she whispered, "You always knew how to humiliate me quietly." I folded the letter. Not humiliation. Closure. She looked away, tears building that she refused to let fall. The judge finalized the decree. I kept the company. She walked away with what little remained of her personal fortune. It was fair, maybe even merciful. When it was over, she stood by the courthouse steps, waiting as people filtered out. "Marcus," she called softly. I turned. "You really meant that letter?" "I did." She nodded once. "Then maybe one day I'll learn what peace looks like too." And then she walked into the city, no cameras, no followers, no entourage. Just Sarah Cole, disappearing into a world that had stopped watching her. That night, I sat in my office, the same one she once decorated with gold frames and fresh orchids. The silence was heavy but clean. The headlines online were already spinning. Judge laughs as CEO forgives wife who tried to ruin him. Some called me a fool. Others called me a hero. But I knew the truth, neither was true. I was just a man who finally understood that sometimes, the only way to win is to stop playing. The next morning the sun broke through my window. For the first time in years I didn't check my phone. I just watched the light move across my desk. Slow, certain, and free. Subscribe, like, comment, and share for more interesting story.